10 years ago, my father threw my bags onto the front lawn and told me only failures enlist in the military. He pointed at my sister, boasting about her medical school acceptance, and said I was no longer welcome under his roof. A decade later, I stood at the back of an elite country club ballroom, watching my sister marry a man my family worshipped as a wealthy defense consultant and high-ranking veteran. When my father spotted me, he demanded to know what a disgrace in uniform was doing, ruining his daughter's perfect day. My sister shouted that I wasn't invited, and the groom arrogantly ordered security to throw me out. I didn't flinch. I simply opened an official investigation folder, looked into his eyes, and said, "You really thought I wouldn't recognize your real name?" His face went completely pale. "My name is Tessa Lang. I'm 30 years old, and today I hold the rank of Staff Sergeant in the United States Army. 10 years ago, my life looked entirely different. I was 20 standing in our front hallway, clutching an enlistment packet while my father, Arthur Lang, hurled every piece of clothing I owned onto the manicured lawn. To him, success only had one definition: high society, prestige, and elite titles. My younger sister Chloe was his pride and joy, celebrating her acceptance into a prestigious medical school that very afternoon. I chose a different path, one built on service, discipline, and earning every single inch on my own merit. My father looked at my uniform documents like they were trash. "Only failures and dropouts join the military," he barked, his voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You are throwing away your life, and as long as you wear that green suit, don't you ever think of stepping foot in this house again." Chloe stood behind him, smirking quietly, holding a glass of champagne as if my exile was part of her personal coronation. I didn't yell. I didn't shed a tear. I simply picked up my duffel bag from the grass, looked my father straight in the eyes, and walked away. That afternoon, I vowed that my respect, my dignity, and my future would never depend on a man whose love was conditional on status. I was going to forge my own name. The next decade transformed me into a woman my father wouldn't even recognize. While my family spent years circulating within high society galas and country club luncheons, I was waking up before dawn in barracks, sweating through rigorous training cycles, and deploying overseas. I didn't just survive the military, I thrived in it. Through relentless focus, I earned my stripes, rose to staff sergeant, and specialized in military criminal investigations. The work demanded razor-sharp attention to detail, uncompromising integrity, and the ability to spot deception beneath the most convincing facades. Occasionally, distant relatives and mutual acquaintances would pass along updates about life back home. Chloe had completed her residency, cementing her status as the untouchable golden child. Then came the grand announcement that had my father practically floating on air. Chloe was engaged to a man named Richard Vance. According to family chatter, Richard was the ultimate catch, a supposed decorated military officer who had transitioned into a wealthy defense technology consultant, driving luxury sports cars and promising to expand our family's influence. My father reportedly boasted to everyone at his golf club that his son-in-law was a true patriot of high rank, unlike the daughter he had cast aside. I listened to these second-hand stories with detached calm. I didn't need their luxury or validation. My medals were earned with sweat and sacrifice, not bought at charity auctions. But deep down, something about Richard's rapid rise and flawless persona felt far too polished to be real, though I never imagined how soon our paths would violently collide. 3 weeks before the wedding, a thick, silver-embossed envelope arrived in my mail. It wasn't sent by my father or Chloe, of course. My estranged Aunt Evelyn, who always secretly disagreed with my exile, had forwarded me a formal invitation along with a clipping from a local luxury lifestyle magazine announcing the union. The feature article was titled, "High Society Heiress to Marry War Hero and Tech Executive." Right on the front page was a full-length portrait of Chloe in a designer gown beside Richard Vance, who wore a military dress uniform adorned with medals and ribbons. The caption proudly listed his alleged combat valor, special operations tours, and rank as a retired major. To an untrained civilian, he looked the picture of patriotic nobility. But the moment my eyes scanned the photograph, my investigative instincts screamed. His ribbon rack was a chaotic disaster. High-level combat decorations were pinned beneath basic service ribbons, arranged completely out of federal order of precedence. His branch insignia belonged to an entirely different specialty than the combat badge pinned on his chest, and his unit shoulder sleeve patch was worn backward. No legitimate officer, especially one claiming a decade of active service, would ever walk out in a uniform assembled with such careless negligence. A knot tightened in my stomach. Stolen valor was a federal crime, but pretending to be a decorated officer to infiltrate a wealthy family signaled something far darker. Out of sheer duty, I logged onto authorized personnel databases to pull his official jacket. When the search for Major Richard Vance yielded 0 records, I knew the Golden Groom was a complete fraud. The deeper I dug into the military and federal databases, the darker the reality became. Richard Vance was an entirely fabricated identity. His real name was Gregory Paul Miller, a disgraced former defense logistics clerk who had been dishonorably discharged 8 years earlier for payroll theft. He wasn't a retired combat major, he owned 0 defense tech patents, and his entire high-flying lifestyle was an elaborate house of cards built on deceit. Worse, Gregory had active federal warrants pending across 2 states for wire fraud and grand larceny. His modus operandi was calculated and predatory. He targeted wealthy families with high social status, invented a heroic military background, and integrated himself into their inner circle before draining them dry. Through interagency coordination with federal fraud investigators who had been tracking him, I uncovered the horrific financial trap he had set for my family. Using power of attorney forms disguised as investment agreements, Gregory had already persuaded my father to liquidate $450,000 of his primary retirement portfolio into a fraudulent overseas holding company. He had also convinced Chloe to sign co-guarantor papers on massive bridge loans totaling over $500,000, falsely claiming it was working capital for a lucrative government defense contract. The moment the wedding was certified and the marriage license filed, the remaining family trusts would become legally accessible to him, and Gregory was planning to vanish abroad within 48 hours, leaving my sister and father completely ruined with millions in unpayable debt. My father had cast me out as a failure, but the training and authority I had earned were the only things standing between my family and total financial destruction. I secured certified copies of the warrants, gathered the evidence files, and coordinated with federal agents for the wedding day. The oak double doors of the country club ballroom swung open, and the hum of 200 wealthy guests instantly fell silent. I walked down the carpeted aisle wearing my pristine Army Service uniform, the brass buttons catching the chandelier light, and my staff sergeant chevrons perfectly aligned. Whispers rippled through the rows of tuxedos and designer gowns as eyes drifted from my polished boots to the thick manila folder held firmly under my arm. My father was standing near the floral arch beside the head table, raising a glass of vintage champagne. When his gaze locked onto me, the glass froze mid-air, and his face twisted with venomous rage. He shoved past the wedding planner and marched toward me, his voice booming loud enough to echo off the vaulted ceiling. "What are you doing here?" he snarled, trembling with fury. "You were told never to return. Did you really think you could barge into your sister's high society wedding in that cheap uniform to embarrass us?" Chloe stepped forward, her lace veil trailing behind her, eyes flashing with indignation. "She wasn't invited!" she shouted to the room, looking at her elite friends as if I were a stray dog that had wandered in. "Security! Get this failure out of here right now!" Richard, or rather Gregory, stepped up beside her, puffed out his chest, and gave me an icy, practiced stare meant to assert dominance. "Listen here, Sergeant," he commanded loudly, adopting a phony officer's bark. "You're disrupting private property. Disappear before I have your commanding officer strip those stripes off your sleeves." I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, took a measured step closer, and let a cold, calm smile touch my lips. "Strip my stripes?" I replied, my voice slicing cleanly through the stunned ballroom. "That's quite an order coming from a dishonorably discharged logistics clerk named Gregory Paul Miller." The name hit him like a physical blow. The smug authority on his face collapsed instantly, replaced by a ghastly, hollow paleness. He took an involuntary step backward, his eyes darting toward the exits as the color completely drained from his skin. "What are you talking about?" my father shouted, turning red with embarrassment and fury. "His name is Major Richard Vance. He's a hero. You're making up lies because you're bitter and jealous of your sister's happiness." Without saying a word, I unclasped the manila folder and handed the certified documents directly to my father. "Look at the records, Arthur. That man never led troops. He stole military payroll 8 years ago, was kicked out of the service in disgrace, and bought his phony medals off the internet." I turned to Chloe, who was staring at her fiancé in mounting terror. "The defense technology startup he promised you? It's a phantom company registered in the Cayman Islands. He's already siphoned $450,000 of Dad's retirement fund, and the bridge loans you co-signed last Tuesday put you on the hook for $500,000 in debt. The moment you signed that marriage certificate today, his flight to Dubai was scheduled for midnight." Chloe began to hyperventilate, looking at Gregory with wide, horrified eyes. "Richard, tell me she's lying. Tell me this isn't true." Gregory couldn't speak. His jaw trembled, and sweat beaded heavily across his forehead. Before he could take another breath, the ballroom side doors swung open with authority. 4 plainclothes federal agents and 2 uniformed police officers strode into the room, their badges gleaming under the lights. The lead investigator stepped directly up to the groom, producing a pair of steel handcuffs. "Gregory Paul Miller, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." As the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, the entire ballroom erupted into chaos. Chloe collapsed onto the floor in her wedding gown, weeping uncontrollably, while my father stood frozen, clutching the evidence papers with trembling hands, his entire world shattering in seconds. As federal agents escorted Gregory out in handcuffs, the ballroom dissolved into stunned whispers and shattered pride. My father dropped to his knees beside Chloe, staring down at the indisputable bank statements in his hands. The man who had spent 10 years treating me like a worthless outcast looked up at me, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Tessa," he stammered, his voice broken and pleading, "you saved us. I was wrong, completely wrong about you. Please come home. Let us be a family again." Chloe reached out a trembling hand from the floor, crying, "Tessa, please, I'm so sorry." I stood tall in my dress uniform, looking down at the 2 people who had discarded me the moment I chose my own path. 10 years ago, you threw my bags onto the lawn and called me a failure," I said calmly, my voice steady and clear. "I didn't step in today for your approval, your gratitude, or your apology. I did it because my uniform stands for duty, integrity, and protecting the innocent, even when they mistreated me." I adjusted my service cap, turned on my heel, and walked out into the afternoon sun without looking back. True honor isn't inherited or bought at country clubs. It's forged through discipline, sacrifice, and standing firm when the world counts you out. Now, I'm curious about your thoughts. If you were in my place, would you ever forgive family members who only respect you after you saved them from ruin? Comment below.